If you're finding yourself hitting creative roadblocks when you sit down to work in your junk journal, today I wanted to share 10 common creative blocks that we all face and how you can fix them. So, hopefully, whether you're just starting out with junk journaling or you've been journaling for years, this will inspire you to start creating and give you some tools and tips that you can use within your pages. Let's start with the big one: fear of making the first mark. The blank page can be so intimidating, I think, especially when you are starting off a brand new journal that hasn't been worked in at all, and you sit there thinking, what if I mess up? What if I put the wrong thing down and then I don't know what to do? But the truth is, with journaling, the first mark doesn't need to be anything special. If it's just like a blob of paint or a bit of collage, it's just the beginning of the page, and you can always add more or change things later on. So my tip for you is, if you're feeling stuck, just start with something super simple and quick, like a doodle or a bold line. Just make the mark and then go from there, because there's no wrong way to start a journal page. So if you make that first mark, the rest will flow from there, and you might surprise yourself with what you are then able to create within your journal page. Which kind of leads me on to the second creative block, which is worrying about perfectionism. Now, I think this one trips up so many of us, and we want everything to look polished and flawless and perfect, but junk journaling is all about embracing imperfections. And I think those little quirks and the little bits of character that are on all of our junk journal pages, I think, is what makes them so special. Like, compared to other different art forms, like the smudges and the tears and the crumpled paper and ephemera, I think like the more I see of that in like junk journal pages, like the more I like it. And so I think that junk journaling is so perfect for setting aside that perfectionism, if you'll excuse the pun, and just letting yourself create. So my tip for this is, instead of worrying about perfectionism, just focus on the experience of actually using your supplies. So if you put something down and it doesn't look right, then just leave it, and you might surprise yourself. Like, if you have some patterns that are clashing on the page maybe, or some colours that don't look right, just think about maybe how you can lean into the more like eccentric look of junk journaling pages, and just experiment and have fun with the pages. And there's always the next page that you can turn over to if you want to have another go and try again. You don't need to worry about creating something absolutely perfect with junk journaling. Now, the third creative block is something that I think, if you are a beginner and you're just getting started out with junk journaling, it can be so easy to get a little bit overwhelmed and overthink all of the supplies by thinking you need all of the fancy tools and everything that you see different people using. But with junk journaling, you can literally do so much with just the basics. If you've got like a couple of old books that you've maybe picked up from a charity shop, some paper ephemera from your daily life, some glue, and maybe a pen, like that's all you really need to get started. And you don't need to have all the latest things in order to create junk journal pages, because for me at least, like that's the joy of junk journaling, is you don't need to have all of the latest and greatest, because the point of junk journaling is to use what we have and to create art from trash. Literally, like that is what junk journaling is, like the original junk journaling. So you can use junk within your journal and you are junk journaling. Like, if you stick a ticket in that you picked up on a trip or something into your journal, that's a junk journal page. It's literally that simple. You don't need to have anything super fancy. So for my actionable tip for this, you can try limiting your supplies on a page to just a few essentials. So keep it simple with maybe like a couple of book pages, maybe some ephemera you've picked up, and a couple of markers. And when you limit your supplies for just one journal spread and challenge yourself to see what you can make with just those basic items, you might surprise yourself with what you actually come up with, because when we set ourselves that constraint of only creating with a few things, we kind of end up thinking outside the box and have to almost be forced to be more creative. So I feel like the less supplies you have, sometimes the more creative then you will actually be with how you use them, and you might find like a new way of doing something on a page and, you know, working with what you have to create something that you might not otherwise have thought about for your page. The next block that I wanted to talk about was not allowing time for the process, and I think this can be really hard, especially when you see people with journals and they are full of loads and loads of pages and all like done in such like intricate ways. And, you know, the process of junk journaling isn't something that we need to rush through. And I think some of the most like interesting journal pages will evolve over time. So you might start with something basic, come back to it a few days later to add some more layers or some more textures. And, you know, you don't need to rush through creating all your journal pages. Like, there's not a challenge to see how many journal pages you can create in order to be like a quote unquote like proper junk journaler. So my tip for you is to maybe set aside some pages within your journal that can be just your in progress pages. So ones that you add a few things to and then come back to, and give yourself that permission to leave it unfinished. So I have a paint sample journal that I've been working on for over a year now, and I feel like that's my kind of permission to not rush through that journal, because I've been working on it so slowly, and coming back to it after a little break I find is often when I'm a bit more inspired to create in it, because when you've not been constantly looking at it, like you see things differently, or you come back to it with like a new piece of ephemera that is like absolutely perfect for that particular page, rather than forcing yourself just to put something down just because you want to have a finished page. So maybe try setting aside like a little journal or just a couple of pages maybe in the back of the journal you're working on, and just let those be your unfinished in progress pages that you can keep dipping in and out of. It's almost a bit like having a like practice journal, almost like separate from your normal journaling, if you will, that you can use as a bit of a tool just to practice and play, and like I said, dip in and out of when you want to try different things. Now, this next challenge I think is tied a little bit to what I was talking earlier about perfectionism, because sometimes it's very easy when we come to our journal pages just to do the same techniques and the same ways of working in our pages, and being a little bit afraid almost to experiment with different techniques. And I think, you know, junk journaling is all about trying new things. So don't just limit yourself to one way of doing a page. Try out the paints or mixed media, anything you can get your hands on. Like I was saying, you don't have to have all the things, but there are different things you can do with what you have as well. So, you know, if you've only got like sort of paper ephemera, you might want to try like cutting out little holes and different ways that you can then layer up the pages to create like texture and depth. So my practical tip for you here is to open up your journal page and try experimenting with something that you haven't done before in your journal page, whether it's a new way of using your ephemera or a different color palette, for example, that you don't normally use. Kind of going a little bit into that unknown, like uncomfortable zone can really help you to grow with how you put together your journal pages. I think I've said this before, but even if you come out of it thinking, okay, that's definitely something I don't like, you've learned something about the process, and there is always something that you can take away from the page and take into the next thing that you are working on. So for this next tip, we're going to go a little bit Bob Ross. So the block here is not embracing the happy accidents. As we're speaking about the experimentation, you know, let's talk about if you accidentally spill something or tear something that you didn't mean to. Don't panic, because those moments can often lead to the unexpected parts of the journal pages where you end up doing something that you wouldn't necessarily have thought to do. So instead of focusing on every little mistake that you make on a page, try and lean into it. Make it part of the page. Could the ink that you've spilled become a new background, or could the tear that you've done be the perfect opportunity to actually create a textured edge on a page, or to think about how you could create like a layered page by stapling it to the next one and creating like a tuck spot. There's always something that you can come up with to work with a page rather than against it. And I think sometimes some of the best pages come from embracing those little imperfections in our junk journals. The next creative block is one that's linked to what I was talking earlier about supplies, and it's not having a junk journal kit or like a go-to set of supplies. Now, this isn't to say that you need all the supplies, but having a set of go-to supplies. So if you just have a little box, like it could even just be a cardboard box if you're just starting out, and if you just put in it all of the things that you are using in your junk journal, so a place where you can collect your ephemera, and a place where you can have a couple of pens and a glue stick, and just have your kit as a collection of your favorite things. It just makes it so much easier when you sit down to work on a page, that everything is all in one place and you don't need to worry too much about looking for things instead of like actually creating the pages. Because sometimes I've been in the flow working on things, and then you get distracted for 10 minutes because you're looking for something that you could have just put in your little grab and go kit. So just things like scissors, maybe like a couple of washi tapes or a few papers that you love. And you could even like have some papers that you kind of collect into separate little bundles so that the colours go together, for example. So it just helps to make the decision making a little bit easier when it comes to putting together a page, because you've kind of already done that work of putting similar things together that you can then grab for your page. So my tip here is prepare a little grab and go kit in a little box or a little pouch with just a few essentials that you use the most often. And that way, when the inspiration strikes to create in your journal, you'll be ready to go and you won't be searching around looking for all your materials. Another creative block that I think we all come across in our journaling is focusing too much on the end result. This is linked to everything I've mentioned in this video, but it can be hard to get caught up in how the finished page is going to look and not focusing then on just the process of making a page. It's all about adding the different layers and the ideas that you try out and just the joy of creating something. So this last tip might be a little bit controversial, but try creating like a little mini journal. So maybe like a zine, something like that, just a sheet of paper that you can fold up into a little journal. Create within your journal, try the different techniques, and maybe use this as a way to combine the things that I've been mentioning in this video. So have fun with the process. And then I want you to tear it up. And not in the same way that we do with masterboards. I literally mean just tearing it with your hands in any which way. And, creating with it not then being like an end result is so freeing, to just focusing more then on enjoying the process of creating the pages and not worrying about what it's going to look like in its final form. And then you can use the collage bits, within your other journal pages. And I think this can help us to remove ourselves from creating the little journal as a finished piece, because we're just focused then on the process and the things that we learn when we're applying the materials or adding the collage or however we're working within our journals. So I hope you found these tips useful and that it inspires you to get creating within your junk journal.